Have you ever noticed that the voice you trust the least is your own? You can encourage a friend, believe in a stranger, see potential in someone you've just met. But when it comes to yourself, every decision feels uncertain, every dream feels unrealistic, every mistake feels like proof that you were never good enough to begin with. And after a while, you stop asking, "What do I want?" Instead, you ask, "What if I'm wrong?" Maybe you've lived this way for so long that it feels normal, but it isn't, because no one is born doubting every thought they have. Self-doubt isn't something you came into the world with. It's something the world quietly taught you. And once you understand where it came from, you may finally stop blaming yourself for carrying it. Self-doubt doesn't appear overnight. It grows, one small moment at a time. Perhaps it began when you were a child. Every time you were told, "That's not good enough, you should be more like your brother. Stop being so sensitive. You'll never succeed if you keep thinking like that." You may have forgotten those words, but your nervous system didn't. Or maybe, no one criticized you directly. They simply never believed in you. They made every decision for you, answered every question before you could, solved every problem before you even tried. Little by little, you stopped trusting your own judgment, because someone else always seemed to know better. As the years passed, you became an adult, but inside, a quiet voice remained, a voice that whispered, "What if you fail? What if everyone realizes you're not capable? What if you're making a mistake?" And eventually, that voice became so familiar, you mistook it for the truth. But here's what many people never realize. The voice inside your head isn't always your own. Sometimes, it's an echo of old fears, old expectations, old criticism, repeated so many times that it now sounds like your own identity. And that's the tragedy, not because you lack confidence, but because you've been listening to someone else's fear for so long that you no longer recognize your own voice. Here's the hidden cost of not trusting yourself. You stop living your own life. Instead, you begin collecting permission from your family, your friends, your partner, your coworkers, even strangers on the internet. Before making a decision, you wonder, what would they think? Would they approve? Am I doing the right thing? Slowly, your confidence no longer comes from within. It depends on applause, on reassurance, on someone else saying, "You're doing fine." But confidence borrowed from other people can disappear overnight. One criticism, one rejection, one disappointed look, and suddenly everything you've built begins to collapse. Not because you became less capable, but because your sense of worth was never truly yours. Think about how often you've changed your opinion after hearing someone speak with certainty, not because they had better answers, but because they sounded more confident than you felt. Confidence can be contagious, but so can self-doubt. When you constantly compare your journey to someone else's highlight reel, you slowly forget something important. No one else has lived your life. No one else has carried your fears. No one else sees the world through your eyes. So why should their voice matter more than your own? Perhaps the greatest loss isn't making the wrong decision. Perhaps it's reaching the end of your life and realizing you never truly trusted yourself enough to discover who you could have become. So, how do you begin trusting yourself again? Not by becoming fearless, not by suddenly knowing all the answers. Trust has never worked that way. Think about the people you trust most. You didn't trust them because they were perfect. You trusted them because they were consistent. The same is true for the relationship you have with yourself. Every time you ignore your own feelings, you break a small promise. Every time you silence your intuition because you're afraid of what others might think, another promise is broken. Eventually, your own heart stops believing you, not because it wants to, but because you've taught it that its voice will always come second. Healing begins when you keep the smallest promises to yourself. If you say you'll rest, then rest. If you say you'll speak honestly, then speak honestly. If you say you'll protect your peace, then don't apologize for doing it. These moments may seem insignificant, but they're not. They're how trust is rebuilt. Not in one dramatic breakthrough, but in hundreds of quiet decisions. that remind your mind, I can rely on myself. You don't need to prove your worth. Before you deserve your own trust. You simply need to become someone who no longer abandons themselves when life becomes uncomfortable, because every time you choose your own truth over your old fears, the voice inside you becomes just a little clearer. And one day, without even realizing it, you'll stop asking, what if I'm wrong? And start asking, what feels true to me? Perhaps you've spent years waiting for confidence to arrive, believing that one day you would finally feel ready. Ready to speak, ready to change, ready to believe in yourself. But confidence rarely comes first. Action does. The people you admire didn't begin because they believed they couldn't fail. They began, despite the uncertainty, they learned to trust themselves by showing up again and again. Not perfectly, but honestly. Maybe that's what you've been missing. Not more motivation, not another inspirational quote, just one small promise that you refuse to break. One honest decision that belongs to you. One quiet moment where you choose your own voice instead of your old fears. You don't rebuild self-trust by becoming a different person. You rebuild it by returning to the person you were before the fear, before the comparisons, before the endless need for approval. That version of you is still there, waiting patiently, not asking you to be perfect, only asking you to listen, because deep inside, beneath every doubt, beneath every fear, beneath every voice that ever told you that you weren't enough, there is still a quieter voice. A voice that has never stopped believing that you were capable. It has simply been waiting for you to believe it too. If this message found you today, perhaps life has been asking you one quiet question for a very long time. Will you finally trust yourself? Not because you'll always make the perfect decision. You won't. No one does. But because your life was never meant to be built on constant permission from other people. Every meaningful journey begins with uncertainty. Every peaceful life begins with one small act of courage. The courage to believe that your own voice deserves to be heard, even when it shakes, even when it isn't certain, even when no one else understands it. Maybe you've spent years searching for someone to tell you that you're enough. A parent, a partner, a teacher, a friend. But what if the words you've been waiting to hear have been waiting inside you all along? What if the person you've needed most has always been yourself? So tonight, before you fall asleep, don't ask, did I make everyone happy today? Instead, ask yourself, was I honest with myself today? Because every honest answer, no matter how small, is another step toward rebuilding the trust that fear once stole from you. And one day, you'll look back and realize that the strongest voice you ever found was never the loudest one. It was the quiet voice that gently whispered, you already know the way. All you had to do was finally trust yourself enough to follow it.